Welcome, everyone. I'm Tom McMillan, the CEO of the LEAD1 Association. Thank you for being part of our webinar today. This is our 15th webinar on critical issues facing college sports. I also want to thank our tremendous panelists who are with us today. Today, we're going to talk about industry perspectives on student athletes' name, image, and likeness. We have two distinguished panels of industry experts who will examine the nuances and the difficult issues around NIL. And so we're going to hear from folks from a variety of different vantage points about their views on NIL. I'm going to introduce the first panel in a minute, but first I want to give you a little bit about LEAD1. LEAD1 is an association of 130 FBS schools. We reach about 85% of the buying power in college athletics. 25,000 college athletic staff and employees have access to our expertise and information resources every day. Point in fact, we have over 800 registrants for today's webinar, which shows not only the timeliness, but the importance of this issue. I also want to thank Blake Lawrence at Open Doors he was also one of our panelists in the second group, for his exclusive sponsorship of this webinar. Now I'm going to turn it over to Hannah, and she's going to go through some ground housekeeping items, and then I'll introduce the panelists. Hannah?
Thank you, Tom, and thank you to all who are joining us this afternoon. I know everyone's got a busy schedule, so we appreciate you taking the time. Just a couple quick housekeeping items. First and foremost, all attendees other than panelists will remain in a listen-only mode for the entire webinar. However, if you would like to speak, there are a number of ways in which you can do so. The first and by far the most popular would be to actually take that back. The first function would be to use the raise hand function, and I will recognize you and unmute you individually. The second, and this is by far the most popular way to ask a question, would be to ask that directly using the questions tab in that control panel. This should be on the right side of your screen, or if you're using a mobile device, this will be on the top or bottom toolbar. These questions will be read aloud, and each attendee will remain anonymous. And lastly, you can also write a question in the chat box, again in that control panel. However, please note that anything written in the chat box will be seen by the entire audience. I also want to make a quick note and let everybody know that this webinar is being recorded and will be distributed both via email within 24 hours of the conclusion of this webinar, and it will also be archived on the LEAD1 website. Now I want to go ahead and introduce Blake Lawrence from Open Doors. He's going to go ahead and give us a few quick opening remarks. Let's see if we can get his webcam turned on. There you are.
Thank you, Hannah, and thanks, Tom, for the introduction, and thanks for all for attending the webinar today. Open Doors is proud to support today's discussion on NIL rights. Some of you may be wondering, what is Open Doors? Why should we sponsor this discussion? Since 2012, we provided technology to the athlete endorsement industry. Today, more than 13,000 athletes around the world use Open Doors to maximize their endorsement value. At the pro level, through our partnerships with the NFLPA, MLBPA, NBPA, NHL, PGA Tour, and more, we've seen what it takes and what the help is required to help athletes understand and maximize and monetize their NIL rights. And they also got to follow the rules set forth by unions, leagues, teams, rights holders. And so we've got that pro side. Then there's the fact that we're proud partners with more than half of Group of 5 and Power 5 schools in the NCAA. And it just gives us unique perspective on the controversial topic of NIL. And the thing is, it is a controversial topic. There's a left and there's a right, but conversations like today's hopefully helps us find a little bit of common ground. If we focus on the athlete, put the athlete in the center, it starts to really reveal itself that there's a support system of people that do want to help athletes find success in their journey in this new NIL era. But beyond that support system, there's really an ecosystem. That's what this is going to become in the NIL era. And in an ecosystem, everyone's actions impact everyone else, right? The way student athletes are educated impacts the way they market themselves. The way they market themselves impacts their value impacts their marketplace appeal. Marketplace impacts their transactions impact the monitoring and measurement and disclosure, like all these things have to come together. And we've seen it firsthand at the pro level. And there's going to be some new parts that are coming to the collegiate space. And while there's several different service providers, they really have to come together. Someone has to bring them together to make this thing happen, to make it manageable for the future of college sports. And we're proud today to bring leaders in this space together to have a conversation on NIL. So Tom, I know that I might have gone over my time in terms of introduction, but this matters a hell of a lot. As a former student athlete myself, and with a little brother who's playing in the NCAA right now, this matters. And we're excited to bring some great minds and excited to host the viewers. And I'll turn it back to you, Tom, to get started.
I can't tell what that logo is on your hat, Blake. Thanks for your support again. What is the logo on your hat?
Oh, that's the Open Doors logo right there.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
There it is.
Yeah.
Right.
There you go.
Well,
3 open doors, man. I'm just repping it. Can't get rid of it.
You look very, very distinguished. So anyway, thank you. Now we're going to move to our panelists, and Blake will be back with us in the second group. But our first panelist is Lyle Adams, who's the founder and CEO of Spry. Lyle is a former student athlete as well, and he's at Columbia right now. At Columbia, he's a Columbia MBA student. Ishveen Anand is the CEO of Open Sponsorship, and Ishveen's so happy to have you here today. Jim Cavalli is the founder and CEO of Influencer. Jim, welcome. Thank you for being here. And Luke Febden is the president of Anomaly Sports Group. He also leads sports law practice at Porter Wright. Now, the first thing I'm going to do is just kind of ask you guys to briefly tell us about your organization and how it connects and fits into this whole NIL issue. So let's start alphabetically again with you, Lyle. Go ahead.
Thank you for the introduction, Tom, and I'm happy to be here. My company, Spry Payment Systems, is a dynamic marketplace that enables all of the complex stakeholders within NIL to operate and work together. For example, student athletes will need to disclose their opportunities, receive educational materials and payments, but at the same time, athletic departments will need to verify these disclosures, do not have conflict of interest. There's no bad actors with payments or agents or boosters. So creating a dynamic system that allows all these stakeholders to communicate and navigate the space is our goal.
Great. Let's go to Ishveen next.
Hi, nice to meet everyone. So as you mentioned, Open Sponsorship, I'm the CEO and founder. We've been around about 5 years. We are the largest marketplace that connects brands to athletes. So some of our clients include ESPN, Sports Illustrated, FanDuel, and as a former sports agent and also as a student athlete in England at Oxford, I really came across the fact that sponsorship, and I'm sure we'll discuss this, is heavily geared towards the top 1% of athletes. And where we come in with our platform is, well, how do the other 99% get deals? What does that look like? Probably a lot of social media, a lot of digital. And how do we talk to those brands to say, hey, you're not using athletes today, use them, and this is how. And so that's really our play where, we've built this amazing marketplace for the pro space. So, we've done deals for as big as a Kyle Kuzma, all the way down to Olympians and lacrosse players. And we're really excited to bring the same platform into the college space.
Thank you. Jim, go ahead.
Yeah, my name is Jim Cavall. I'm the founder and CEO of Influencer. We've been around about 3 years now and grown fast in this amazing space of athlete NIL at the college level. I'm a former student athlete, and the reason I started this company is because to me, NIL wasn't a matter of if, but when. And if you follow any athletes on social media, you know that regardless of how big their audience size is, the athletes who do the best with their NIL on social are the ones who are the best storytellers, who post the most frequently and often and do it without getting paid. And by doing that, they create an engaged audience that they can then monetize. And so that's really where we've concentrated over the first 2.5 years of business. And we've built a network of more than 100 college athletics partners, more than 700 teams, more than 22,000 athletes who on a daily basis use their Influencer app to get pictures and videos of themselves from their school, from Getty, and USA Today and all the different coverage they have, so they can tell their story frequently and grow an audience that will be now worth something when they go to monetize their NIL. So once again, I really thank you, Tom, and Hannah and Blake for putting this together and paving the way for this conversation, because it does matter very much.
Yeah, thank you. Luke, your turn.
Yeah, thank you so much, Tom. Thank you for the rest of LEAD1 for having us together for this important discussion. So I'm the founder of Anomaly Sports Group, and Anomaly is focused on delivering life skills education to college and professional athletes, really on topics that will help them be successful outside of their sport and in life. And as Tom mentioned, I'm the head of the sports law practice at Porter Wright, a partner there at the firm, where I serve as a non-agent sports attorney working to really protect professional athletes. And so when you think about Anomaly Sports and delivering this education, it's because of the trends that we see where there are some deficiencies in life skills that professional athletes have, or where they're constantly being taken advantage of, being able to take that, turn that into educational seminars, workshops, and discussions that we can then have with college and other athletes to really help make sure that they're protected and taken care of. So that's where this name, image, and likeness kind of interest on our end comes into play, because we see so often at the pro level on a regular basis where athletes have been taken advantage of, and our goal is to figure out how best to provide education that can protect them and set them up for success. And
Thank you all. Thank you all. Very different perspectives. Let's get into the substance here. You know, one of the topics being discussed is using a third party to either manage, oversee, or provide real-time disclosure on this whole process. LEAD1 submitted a paper to the NIL advocating that as well, sort of a third-party administrator. And so I'd like to get your color on that. Lau, I know you have a particularly unique technological solution. Why don't you elaborate there, and then Ishveen will go to you, and Jim and Luke.
Thank you, Tom. For starters, the NCAA across the three divisions has 500,000 student athletes. If every athlete has to disclose their opportunities, we have to look for a different medium or method for these student athletes to share their opportunities with the institutions in the NCAA. What I'm proposing is moving to a digital disclosure process where student athletes can quickly submit their opportunities via mobile application or a web-based application. That information now facilitates or flows to the athletic departments, where they can now make quick decisions on, is this a potential conflict of interest? Can the student athlete move forward with this? This disclosure method now allows us to build a centralized database or repository that contains all this historical information that will help with future sponsorships. It provides the foundation to, fraud. A central disclosure system, think about something very similar to how marketplaces have been created. Transparency is very important, and I think that can be established with NIL opportunities as well.
Ishveen, go ahead.
Yeah, I think it's obviously a heavily debated topic about a TPA versus individual parties doing different things. In our opinion, we feel that you have so many great minds just alone on this panel and in the other panel working on solutions, and many people have been working on solutions, whether it's Jim to think about brand building for athletes, us thinking about how to get brands investing in sports when they weren't otherwise, some people thinking about reporting. And so we actually feel that everyone can be working together, and rather than having one solution that's the jack of all, have different solutions that's the masters of each. So in our opinion, if it comes down and NCAA does turn around, or conference turn around and say we need one solution from start to finish, of course we, having built up the technology, are interested in being part of that, but we actually feel there's probably more value in differing solutions, taking different aspects, especially because of the sheer scale where you have so many athletes. The solution for a star quarterback is probably going to be an agency, and the solution for a field hockey D3 player is going to probably look like something else. And so I think we have to be mindful to not say, okay, this is the way, and really consider, okay, well, what's already existing out there, and who can slot in where.
Interesting. Jim.
I think technology is always interesting, because the ideas and even the quality of the product doesn't always command people actually using it. And what what I believe is that getting 500,000 people of any age in any industry to do something with technology is going to be a challenge. I mean, look at all of the schools represented today watching this. How hard is it for you to get your fans to download your team app to buy tickets and merchandise and other things so that you have more data to resell them on things? It's a challenge, right? And so we've just been super focused on how can we get student athletes, a large enough sample of them, to be in one place technologically on a daily basis. And Teamworks, who's now our parent company, we were recently acquired by them through a merger deal we did with them, is doing that at even a larger scale than us. And by seeing student athletes use our technology every day and seeing them show up, all of the people's initiatives that are represented today are easier to now get in front of student athletes. It's a lot harder to have a good idea and get them there, but if they're already there, to put legal solutions, to put data solutions, to put brand sponsorships in front of them is going to be a lot easier. And so I just think whoever the third party is going to have a challenge in engaging the student athletes to the degree they'll need to be able to pull off what the third party needs to pull off. And that's why I'm not really sitting here worrying about the final regulations next year. I'm just focused on continuing to get as many student athletes as I can to grow their brand through our app every day, because everything else will work itself out.
Interesting. Luke, go ahead.
Yeah, I think I would agree a lot with what Ishveen stated earlier, right? Which is that this really can't be a one size kind of fits all model as it relates to the TPA. Like when you see the diversity of the players and the types of opportunities and experiences that they're going to have, being able to ensure that the needs are being met of those student athletes based on where they are is going to be critical, right? So when you think about this idea that, you know, I've seen it on our legal side, right? When we work with, you know, athletes that are lottery picks in basketball or top 10 picks in football or what have you, you're going to have those elite of the elite, and there are going to be some unique challenges that come with making sure that they're protected. But you've also got, like was mentioned earlier, the other 99%. And what does that look like in terms of a lacrosse player doing an appearance agreement, you know, somewhere and whatnot? So the idea that the TPA could potentially have some, as I know LEAD1 has talked about, some standardized forms, standardized agreements, there could be some benefits there. But what is it that the student athlete thinks that they're going to get from this TPA, right? Are they thinking that if the TPA, if they submit a potential deal that they're thinking about through this third-party administrator and it kind of quote unquote goes through, are they then saying like, oh, well, this third-party administrator said this is a good deal for me? Right. And so maybe it is, maybe it isn't, but I think it's going to be important to make sure that there's obviously education that comes along with this, but that there's not just a rush to a one size fits all model, that we make sure that we meet these student athletes where they're at.
Yeah, it's, you know, the whole concept of the TPA was to create a facilitator, not necessarily pro or con to a deal. One of the points that Lyle may want to expound upon is the whole issue of boosters and bad actors and bad agents, and all of you can have a chance to talk about this, but that's real. That's going to happen. Underground deals, all that. How do each of you see that being managed? While the whole idea of a third party was to create this repository, this registrar, using technology as a way to do that, but you may have some perspective on that, and the rest of you as well.
Thank you, Tom. I mean, Luke, I agree. Like everyone has had really good points about like, the pros and cons of a third-party administrator. But from a compliance and regulatory standpoint, having a third party who's neutral, right, who basically is in the best interest of every party, whether it's a brand, sponsorship, or company, or the student athletes or institutions themselves, creates the framework to allow it to catch these actors. For example, you know, a solution that could work for boosters and agents would require some buy-in from the NCAA and the member institutions. But in theory, if a school would provide a list of any booster who contributes over $15,000 to a said school in X number of years, as a student athlete discloses an opportunity, you could run those companies or those known entities through this database now. And if there's a flag that says, hey, this student athlete is partnering with the booster who gave this school $100,000, maybe the third party or an auditing firm investigates the opportunity beforehand. If you think about a lot of the historical recruiting violations that happened, it's 2 or 3 years after that. It'd be very powerful to say, hey, an athletic department, you should be mindful of this agreement that the student athlete is entering before it's a problem. Be more proactive instead of reactive.
Ishveen?
Yeah, I can definitely add to that. So in our current platform today, I think one of the biggest benefits of technology is the ability to scale guardrails. So a great example of this is CBD as a category is not allowed to work with many professional leagues because the leagues, the NBA, the NFL, the MLS say, you know, our athletes cannot promote CBD. And so we have a blanket kind of check in our platform, like if you are export, you cannot do a CBD deal. And so I think what's important is whether it's a TPA or whether it's a free market solution, whoever the players are in the market must be compliant. And there has to be a way that, you know, we talk about it all the time, Chinese technologies come and they, you know, grab your data and, you know, security risks. We have to make sure that any solution doesn't jeopardize the, you know, the eligibility or the rules and regulations, and they can be tracked. I think what we just have to be careful of is that, are we sanctioning a few different free marketplaces, or are we giving one person everything? And then, you know, at the end of the day, like, data is valuable in today's times. If you went to, let's say CAA takes the top 1% of athletes and represents them. If you go to CAA and say, hey, you need to disclose every deal at what value, I think you'll have a tough time. That's a lot of private information that they don't tell anyone. So I think we have to be very like, again, going back to how complicated this is, like, we're just going to turn around and tell CAA, suddenly you have to tell us how much, like, Zion Williamson's getting paid from, you know, whoever. I don't see whether they'll do that. And is that a federal law? Is it a state law? You know, so I think there's a lot of things to think about, but guardrails are very important. Boosters, fair market value, making sure athletes don't by mistake represent an alcohol company and then, you know, have repercussions, don't avoid tax payments even by mistake. So I think there's a lot of things to think about, and technology does help to solve a lot of those as well.
Well, to Lyle's point, which he said technology can be the way to police these guardrails. How are you going to do this? The big fear of our ADs are that you're going to have boosters and you're going to have bad actors, and it's going to be a mess. It's going to be like the recruiting scandals times 10. So what's your thought on that?
You know, at the end of the day, every athlete will either be represented by themselves or an agent, right? If there is an agent, then similar to the NFL model, they should be registered agents on file. And if they're representing themselves, then realistically, it is very hard to go out and get sponsorship. So realistically, the athletes are going to be using a third-party system. And so I think what we need to make sure of is that there's a list of, like, okay, qualified ways that you can go to market as an athlete. If an individual, you can do X, Y, Z. You can't just go along the street and be handed a bunch of cash from, you know, a local brewery to turn up. It has to go through a system. But I think we have to be mindful of the fact that, you know, there are many MRR partners out there with relationships with schools and sponsors who may want to, you know, be part of the conversation. And there's obviously all your sports agencies. There are legal firms who, you know, may want to do marketing deals. So there's going to be a number of players. And in our view, it should be sanctioned players who all have to abide by the same sort of guardrails and rules.
So you believe in sanctioned players, Jim?
Yeah, I think that this really all comes down to transparency. Transparency, I think, to the degree that even the press can access the ledger of deals that are happening. I think it has to be transparent enough where every deal, first of all, let's go back. We already said 99% of these deals are not going to be huge deals, right? They're going to be smaller deals, which is reason, in my opinion, reason number 543 why we don't need representation to be the solution for all the athletes. A platform to go to process transactions, to mitigate the time and the amount of money they're paying to process the transaction for themselves as an athlete is important, but that will also create more transparency. The more representation, I think the more chance we have for bad actors, and the less technology, the more chance we have for bad actors. So to me,
what about Ishveen's comment? It says that, you know, some agencies won't want this information disclosed. It's proprietary.
Well, this is just college, right? And maybe we just keep it that way. And that's one of the guardrails we set up, right? Because there are conflicts between a college athlete and a pro athlete that don't exist at the pro level. Time that they have to spend in school, in practice, whatever your reasons are. There's a long list I could give, but I want to let Luke answer this as well. The last thing I want to say is this is also a system that will evolve. Data is very important here. And so the more that we start doing this, where there's a registration process for the advertiser and the athlete to solve all these questions around taxes, bad actors, fair market values, the system will evolve. It will get better as we go. And if we think we're going to have it down in year one and we're trying to do that, then we're trying for something that's not achievable. So we really need to think long term here. And I mean everybody all the way to the top, because it's not going to be perfect overnight.
Look,
I mean, that's literally like, you took the words right out of my mouth at the very beginning, Jim. Yeah, you got it, right? I mean,
we've been on too many webinars together, Luke.
We do. But it's not going to be perfect, right? I mean, we know that it's going to take time. And let me maybe take a little different spin on this, right? When we look at the NCAA now, there is, for basketball, we know that there's an agent certification process if you want to test the waters and come back, right? So the NCAA has started this process of kind of evaluating and gathering information on agents, certain agents and things like that. We could see the same thing, when you look at the pros, kind of like to what Jim talked about, you've got the NFL Players Association, and they've got the financial advisors program that if you want to be a financial advisor with athletes, you got to register with them, you send all this documentation, but that doesn't stop those athletes still from sometimes being taken advantage of, right? So we know that there are going to be some challenges. So how do we best kind of navigate this, right? And try to mitigate as best as possible and enforce some of these kind of guardrails, right? I think what has been mentioned already in terms of, having some, depositories or repositories rather for some of that information, I think helps. But listen, I've got to ring the bell as well on education. And I don't mean that solely from the, either the self-serving perspective or just generally, but I mean it from the perspective that one of the reasons why athletes get taken advantage of is because they don't know any different, right? So if an agent comes to them and says, hey, I want to represent you, I want to work with you, and I'm going to get you all these deals, the players get sold on what that agent can do for them, right? So when the agent then says, great, here's my agreement that all of my players signed, the player just signs it because they've already made up in their mind, I want to work with that agent, right? So when you can start to educate these athletes around what is normal and what is not normal in agency agreements, right? And I think we could all imagine that if you're, looking at representing, if you're an agent looking at representing, student athletes, there's no way that student athlete should sign on to a multi-year agency agreement with you, right? I mean, it should be, the player should have the flexibility to be able to get out of those agreements, in a matter of days. And that kind of education has to come so that they can start to understand what is market, what is normal, and what's outside of the norm.
well, and that's very consistent with the role of a higher ed university is to educate. We have a question in the queue, Yana. Why don't you read that and see if anybody has any comments?
Yeah, sure thing. So the question reads, if an independent, preferably nonprofit TPA is not used, how do you suggest that college athletics departments account for the increased budgetary costs, which will be substantial, that will come along with their increased responsibility?
Anybody want to take that?
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Ishveen, first.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think it comes down to taking a step back and saying, okay, what are these increasing costs? Where are they coming from? So a good example here is we have a lot of athletes who graduate from school, join our platform, and they're doing $100 deals. Now, what is the, like, what kind of administration do you want to do on an athlete making $100? Right? Like, we charge 20%, that's a $20 margin. Like, now if they have to run to you every time as a school to say, hey, can I do this deal? Of course, your administrative costs are going to go through the roof. So I think we need to take a step back and say, what do we anticipate this is going to even look like in a year? And then let's allocate the costs accordingly. Like I think Lyle mentioned, like maybe it's transactions over 15,000 that get alerted. But then, talking about boosters, what happens if someone pays someone 1,000 over 20 payments? So I think we just need to take a step back and say, okay, what do we definitely need to administer? Is it the tax side? Is it what they can and can't do? Is it conflicts with existing school categories? And then we need to say, okay, what's the best solution for making sure people abide by that? Ideally using technology, And then let's think about, okay, now what's left that cannot be solved through technology or scale that does rely on the school. So I think it's just taking a step back and looking at all the different parts of the process to think about, well, why are we telling them to come to the ADs?
Anybody else on that one?
Yeah, I'll jump in on that. Go ahead, Lyle.
Go ahead.
On that, I agree. Technology will be very important and can be leveraged. So if you look at other industries, like technology has been used to make people and departments more efficient. Take for example, yesterday was tax day. 10 years ago, doing your taxes was a very burdensome tax. Now with TurboTax, H&R Block, you can do your taxes in 15 to 30 minutes by uploading a few forms. So I think, I feel like departments think about the overhead that might exist, like maybe adding 2 or 3 compliance directors or lawyers on staff is a $300,000-$400,000 cost in terms of salary and benefits. But looking at, like, to your point, Ashfeen, technology, can you figure out ways to, like, do some of these automate some of these tasks or use scripts and algorithms to solve 80% of the problem? Like, yes, there will always need to be a human element, but I think there's a lot of benefits with technology in terms of keeping costs down. And as athletic departments now, and like sports in general, are starting to be more open and flexible with technology solutions as it comes to stadium capacity, CRM marketing, customer engagement. So I think the same can be said or used within the NIL space.
Luke.
Yeah, so I think it goes back, and I think Ishbeen raised the right question, right? Which is, what is it that you're administering and why, right? And when you do that, I think, one of the things that we've heard and one of the things that we've had, conversations about is just the idea of, athletic departments go to alumni and the boosters, et cetera, to raise funds for, stadiums, for improving stadiums and all that kind of stuff. But if the focus is also on how do we make sure that we are, not just doing the policing side of things in terms of enforcement and compliance and that work, but if we're also looking at making sure that our players, our student athletes, kind of understand that they're not taking advantage of, that there's some clarity and understanding around the transactions that they may be entering into, raising funds for those causes are just as important to the development of your athletic department.
Yeah, so we got a couple more questions about from our listeners and viewers. One of them, they focus on how in the world, and this is one that we struggled with our work group, about high school kids. I mean, let's say a Zion Williamson kind of high school student signs a deal, and how in the world is that going to be policed? And one of the questions that we dealt with is, let's say Zion signed with Under Armour. Would he have to cancel that deal if he was going to Duke, which is a Nike school? I'd love to. So we have a couple questions on that subject. Anybody have perspective on that?
I think whether it's the last question or whether it's that question, a lot of this stuff has to be defined by the NCAA. I mean, first of all, the last question, I'm still a little perplexed because it's like, so there wouldn't be a third party, but the current limitation on the university to be involved in brokering deals would still be in place?
No, think about it this way. The NCAA doesn't have jurisdiction over high schools. What happens if
I know, I'm going back to the last question, because what I'm trying to say is with the last question that everybody answered, it was basically saying that the school still can't be involved in brokering deals. And right. On top of that, there's no third party. I don't know if that's even, then how is it governed in general is what I'm trying to say. Yeah. These levers, if one's going to be pulled up, another one's going to go down, and they all affect each other. They ricochet. And to take the Zion question, we see this happen at the pro level, and Luke could really speak to it. But the point is, if an athlete has a deal with another brand that they've already signed, or maybe are even allowed to sign during their time in college, then there's going to be certain restrictions and allowances that the league has to establish. And in this case, the NCAA will have to establish. And this goes into not having a union, not having a players association, and the vulnerabilities and exposures that are left open by that in these types of cases. So, I mean,
so you think it has to be, it can be permitted, but it has to be managed. So
it's kind of like the category restrictions. I still go to the current recommendations, the category restrictions, like define them more. So if a school is doing a deal in a soft drink category, the athlete can do a deal in the soft drink category if it's the same brand the school's doing the deal with, or can the athlete just not do anything in the soft drink category altogether? Because if they can't do anything in the soft drink category altogether, then the school's got deals in just about every category. The athlete has just about no opportunities unless they're the kicker from Central Florida who's good enough to get a big following on YouTube and post every day, which is 99.999% of kids aren't going to do that. So that's what I'm still trying to figure out from the current recommendations, because they're gray.
Well, we asked our ADs about that. We said, okay, we understand exclusive categories. How about if a athletic department had 10 car dealerships with deals? Could that athlete go to one of those car dealerships? And the majority of our ADs said no, but open it up. Ishveen, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, a lot of thoughts on that. So obviously from the pro space, you know, it's established, right? Like NBA has, you know, if you are working with a league sponsor, you can use image and rights, which, you know, is a whole nother topic. If you're not a league sponsor, then there's a restriction on what you can use, but you can use the athletes. So, I mean, I'm a big fan of like, why change what's already working? Is working in the pro space, is working for Olympics, like let's extend it to college. So, I mean, in my opinion, it should be, you know, if you have an exclusive sponsor, they should be able to use the athlete with image and marks and rights. And I know that's controversial. And if you don't, then anyone else can come along and work with them as long as they, you know, don't contravene any existing relationships. Because, you know, as Jim said, if you open up NIL and make this, you know, this is like a big topic and everyone, all the journalists are writing about it. And the first time one athlete turns around and says, hey, by the way, did you know that we can't do any deals because of the restrictions? You're literally opening up a can of worms where journalists will come in and attack everyone on this call and all the other stakeholders for saying, hey, was this all a farce? You gave students the ability, but you took it all away at the same time. So I think we have to be really careful of that because a lot of these deals are going to be regional. And they are going to be with categories where the schools already have, you know, brokered relationships. And back to your high school point, with platforms like Overtime and, you know, all of these guys really doing a big focus on high school athletes are definitely going to start getting sponsorship if it doesn't affect their NCAA eligibility. So this is a big question we need to answer, and it shouldn't be like, you know, a line item. It should be like a whole conversation topic, and it probably needs to be had with the Nikes and the Under Armours, who are probably going to be the ones who are doing most of those sponsorship deals.
But aren't you, if it just carte blanche in the high school level, won't the shoe companies just go into there, try to sign a kid up? Nike signs a young star up. They probably will steer them to a Nike university. Your thoughts on that, Luke?
Yeah, I don't think that they'll steer them to that particular brand's university. They may try. I mean,
it was done recently in the recruiting scandals, you know?
Right. But at the same time, I think that when you open it up and it's not done under cloak of darkness and it's all out in the open, that I could sign with Nike when I'm in high school. I could go to an Adidas school, but I could still have all the flexibility that I want potentially when I then go pro. Because we're really talking for the most part about those elite athletes, right? When we talk about the shoe deals and things like that. And so, you know, from that perspective, I think going back to your question, like, I think high schools need to regulate, their high school athletic associations need to regulate what they're doing in terms of name, image, and likeness. And just like in the pros, you know, when you enter into the league and you have to report what those deals are that you have, those endorsement deals you have, I think there's going to be a need for disclosure once you then transition from high school into the pros. Because we know high schoolers have all these social media followings and they have this brand influence already. So we know they're going to have those opportunities. And I think that it's going to be a matter of making sure that that's disclosed when they transition. But I also think that these contracts are going to be, they're going to have carve outs. So if you sign with Nike and you go to an Adidas school, let's say, and you have to wear, you know, only Adidas apparel when you're doing school or institution related functions, but in your free time or off time, you can wear the brand that you signed to. And I think that's going to come into play in terms of the compensation that affects both parties. That's going to affect both the player, but then also the school when those apparel companies look at the broader school contracts.
Hey, Jim, a question came in. I think it's right up your alley. The institution involvement, the NCAA and most of our ADs really want that Chinese wall separating these activities. You know, no group licensing, no joint deals, those kinds of things. Your perspective on that? And then I'll go to Wow after that.
So my perspective is, first of all, I feel a lot of empathy for the compliance folks, because they now are going to have to police whether or not their student athletes are eligible based on being compliant with the NIL regulations of the time. In everything else that they police in compliance, let's use academics for an example. A young man or young woman doesn't go to class, is failing, gets a bad progress report. They see the progress report, they see the class attendance. They're involved on the front end to help get that young man or woman back on track so they stay eligible. In this case, they're not involved on the front end at all based on the current recommendations. But the compliance folks are still going to be responsible to help coach keep that young man or woman eligible with all of these things we're talking about today that could really present a lot of problems, bad actors, et cetera. And so I just don't understand why you would ask your university to only be involved on the back end, just to limit some liabilities on the front end that come with a great deal of responsibility to live out the mission of higher education, which is to maximize the potential of the student in college athletics, to maximize the potential of the student athlete. And so I think schools have to be involved in the front end. I think they need an NIL role in the department. They need an NIL working group. And coaches, which we're fortunate, I'm personally fortunate to have a lot of strong head coach and AD relationships. And they're now realizing more than ever that regardless of what the rules are, they need to know now what the brand effect of their school is. Whether it's Stetson, who I was on the phone with earlier this morning, or North Carolina, who I was talking to earlier this week, they're looking at how are we helping our student athletes grow their audience and their engagement percentage while they're here? What is that worth to them, even if they go to the next level? Let's look at our pro athletes and what they've made. And so becoming sophisticated around that, that's involvement you can do regardless of what the rules are. And you have to do it because it's going to take center stage in recruiting. It's not just academics and athletics and facilities in the arms race anymore. It's, hey, how are you going to build my brand? So I think schools got to embrace this and not be scared of it, but they got to lean in. And part of that is having more involvement on the front end.
Thanks, Hayward. Time is tight. We got a lot of topics to try to get to. I'm going to go to Wow and your thoughts on that. Institutional involvement.
I agree with Jim. I think institutions have to be involved. At the end of the day, if there is a violation, the institution will be penalized at the end of the day. If you look at these infractions, yes, the student athlete is deemed ineligible, but over the course of time, universities now are slapped with recruiting violations, which impact scholarships, have postseason bans. So to Jim's point, it's kind of unfair saying, hey, you have to be aware of this, but you can't get involved, because they are now, unfortunately, they reap negative consequences when bad behavior happens. In terms of how this can work, I think education and awareness is one key aspect, and setting what the guardrails are up front for the university could work, right? Like, the university can't help break through the deal, and I understand that should not be the case. It's conflict of interest, but the university can say, hey, here are some resources or people that we've partnered with that can help you identify, is this a good opportunity for you? Here's a law firm that can help you create an LLC for a camp or a liability waiver, or here's an agent that who's certified and vetted. So I think through a lot of open conversations between all the stakeholders, whether it's the universities, the third parties, the brand and sponsors, and the NCAA, we could figure out a very interesting working relationship that benefits all parties. But having the institutions in the dark, I think, just sets the system up for long-term failure.
So we're down a couple minutes. I just got an interesting question in, so we'll try to give fairly short answer to this. But the NCAA believes it needs a federal bill to gain control of the NIL issue. If you were given the opportunity, remember Congress, to write one part of a federal NIL bill, what would you include? Ishveen?
Oh my gosh, there's so many different points. I think only one part. So I would say, for me, I think going back to that school point, it is really important to understand.
Oh, sorry. You're. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Do you have another mic?
I don't. Okay, why don't we just go to someone else quickly and then come back to me?
And she will go back to her. Group licensing. Without group licensing, we are limiting the opportunity for women, and many other mid to lower tier athletes that by themselves will not have as much opportunity, but in a group will. Whether it's the team being able, a team of athletes being able to do a sponsorship opportunity, or whether it's a group from the same conference, whatever, there are a lot of opportunities. And even the PAs themselves at the pro level have told us that you do not need a union to do group licensing. That's what I would add.
Luke.
Yeah, Ishmeen, I saw you were about to say something. Do you want to go ahead?
Okay, thank you. I was going to say that I think from our work in the pro space, I can tell you how important the school MRR sponsors potentially could be, and how the ecosystem in the regional will play such a huge part. And so, you know, we have partnered with JMI Sports, who have a number of schools that they represent, recognition of this, because, you know, at the end of the day, when you think about like Florida, it's going to be the local sponsors that are going to contribute to the NIL revenue of the student athlete. And so that ecosystem is already built. The MRR partners, whether it's Learfield or JMI, the schools are already talking to those brands. So by taking them out and saying that they cannot be involved in the conversation is really like, it's going to super hurt the revenue potential of the athletes. And it's just not going to make sense for the ecosystem.
Luke.
Yes, I would just add to it education. Obviously, that's kind of my thing, but here's the point. I would make it a requirement. If you're going to take money as a student athlete in a name, image, and likeness deal, you have to take a certain form of curriculum or certain type of classwork. Because what that does is, for the 99.2% of athletes who are not going to play pro, what that does is it encourages them to continue to get that education that can help them in the stuff outside of their sport, right? When they graduate, maybe you're developing more lawyers, marketing folks, etc., because you've got resources already through, you know, business schools on campus, marketing professors, digital storytelling, all that kind of stuff. There's an opportunity to really use this as practical education that we know student athletes want when it becomes real, because it affects them in their pocketbook.
Lyle, do you have any thoughts, or can I?
I agree with what everyone said. My point's somewhat unorthodox. I would say it's like the promise to evaluate the environment every year. But as everyone has mentioned, what NIL looks like at the start of 2021 will be drastically different in 2 years' time or 3 years' time. So having a bill or a law that's put in place from the get-go will need to be changed and amended. So, you know, my ask is like, lawmakers approach this problem with an open mind and being flexible, saying that, hey, what the future looks like now will be different than what the marketplace ultimately ends up being. For example, look at Amazon. Amazon came into the market selling books. Now they sell a lot more than books, right? So, you know, if we think about NIL in the same space, we need to have a basic understanding of the flexibility and open mind, saying this will change before laws and rules and regulations need to change accordingly.
I wish Congress worked that fast, but I appreciate your perspective. Listen, here, let's close up with this comment. 5 years from now, you know, NIL's coming. It's Brave New World's here, either by state, federal, or NCAA, or all the above. How do you see the world 5 years from now sorting out in terms of this Brave New World? But got to keep it brief because we only have a couple minutes. Go. Start with Ishvi.
I see that we've gone through rounds of iterations and mistakes and tears and joys in this NIL process. And 5 years from now, it will feel much more like a free market solution, where athletes understand what they can do. They've learned how to build their profiles. They understand what a sponsorship deal looks like, and they know where to go and get it. So free market solution with all the players being good, and they're being guardrails, but not needing to happen.
Practice makes perfect, so to speak. Jim.
The three main parties involved will be playing together instead of working against each other. These parties are the advertiser, the school, and the athlete. So instead of the athlete and the school competing in some sort of way for deals, they'll be able to do deals together, and rising tides will lift all boats.
Luke.
Yep, I agree with Jim, and I think that in 5 years, people will say, why wasn't this done years ago?
Lyle, final word.
Echoing Luke's thoughts, why didn't
Yeah. Well, thank you all very much. This was a very delightful conversation. I learned a lot, and I'm sure our listeners learned a lot as well. And And with that, we're going to turn to our second panel with a little technology move here. I thank you all for being here, and we're going to add Courtney, AJ, and Blake to our panels, and we're going to start our second panel. Hey guys, good to have you back. We're just waiting for AJ.
I'm out here if you can hear me.
I can. So that's fine.
Okay.
If your video comes back, we'll add that. But want to thank Courtney Altimus, the CEO of Team Altimus, AJ Estes, who is the founder and CEO of Navigate Research, Blake Lawrence, who's co-founder and CEO of Open Doors. And thank you, Blake, again for endorsing and sponsoring this event. The first question we asked the panel right before was, how is this going to be administered, managed, providing real-time disclosure? We propose that LEAD1, a third-party administrator, not really to opine on deals, but just to red flag situations that may be untoward for the athlete. Let's go down the list. Courtney, your thought, and then we'll go to Blake and AJ.
I agree with a lot of what the last panel said. I think that there's so many moving parts and there needs to be so many specialists in place. That idea of sort of one general contractor running all of these different specialists to me makes sense because it brings in that third party, completely objective expertise. I think, first of all, you've done an incredible job bringing together such breadth and depth of expertise today. I can't really think of a major part of the moving parts of NIL that are not collectively on these two panels. And so I was listening to the first panel and thinking about how all complementary their services are, some overlapping, but it just seems to me like there could be a tremendous team that works with that TPA to ultimately help monitor all of this so it's a success and we can scale it as we go forward. I think too, it's difficult. We get so many questions from compliance folks and everybody is really starving for information, for help, for direction. So I think just even the panel today, giving some information from various areas of expertise is great. But, like our due diligence technology that could be used to vet advisors, agents, any of those professional service providers who could be bad actors, that could be a critical piece of it, but that's our specialty. And all of the other components is not what we do.
Courtney, I forgot to ask this, but you can all blend into this question. What does your organization, how do you fit into the NIL piece as well? So why don't you say to that, and then we'll go to AJ or Blake next.
Okay, great. So, and I forgot to thank you, Tom, and LEAD1 for putting this panel together, and Blake and Open Doors for sponsoring it. So Team Altimus empowers both student athletes and professional athletes to trust their financial knowledge and to minimize financial distractions through education and financial advisor due diligence. And that financial advisor due diligence is both training and using that technology that I referenced to help not just vet up front, but it also monitors ongoing. Right. So from the NIL perspective, both at the student athlete level for education and then at the administrative level for the vetting process.
Let's go to Blake next.
Yeah, so I'll just give some brief overview on Open Doors. So Open Doors is an athlete marketing platform. We exist to help athletes maximize endorsement value. Started back in 2012, very early days, and our partners at the pro level, NFLPA, MLBPA, MBPA, they rely on our team, our technology to help them understand who's getting paid by who to do what, right? And then there's the other side of our business, which is helping those athletes get access to media that they otherwise wouldn't have the rights to distribute. So there's really both sides of helping athletes market themselves as well as monetize their NIL. And so those things kind of all come together. And I think where we sit in the NIL world, where we look to help, is that we've provided a NIL transaction management technology to the pro space for the last 7-8 years that there's a flip of a switch that can translate directly to what the in-state. If the rules change tomorrow, Tom, there's a switch we can flip and provide transparent compliance into the types of transactions that are going to occur in the marketplace. So that's kind of where we sit, and you'll hear me talk more about infrastructure as we go through the conversation.
AJ, from your vantage point, which is very beautiful, what are your thoughts?
Let me just confirm you can hear me, Tom. Is everything good?
Yeah.
All right. I hope nobody's offended by the Blues Brothers or the T-shirt. It's not meant as a slight on anybody. I'm hiking and camping in northern Arizona and southern Utah, so apologies for the appearance and technology if we run into issues. Navigate, we flatter ourselves by calling ourselves the McKinsey of sport, so you can feel free to laugh, but our perspective on this is we have this rare position where we work with all the pro sports leagues, all the major networks and broadcasters, 13 of the top 15 agencies. We even work directly with a lot of brands, and so we're sort of in the center of this ecosystem, this world, right? And collegiate athletics specifically is my personal passion. We've worked on a lot of naming rights deals, apparel deals, things along those lines, but most frequently, more than anything else, multimedia rights deals. So there's no question there's this intersection has been previously discussed about sponsorships and endorsements and, you know, where that lies. Though it won't be a material part of our business, but one of our key niches is understanding what the fair market value is. What is the fair price to pay for a sponsorship or endorsement? So I think that might be why myself here, AJ Maestas, and Navigate is a part of the panel, and it's nice to meet, and I wish I could see you all.
We got a question in already, Blake, for you, and then the others of you can answer us too. What kind of deals do you foresee for the other 99% of the athletes in college? Or is this going to be a 1% solution?
No, this will be 100% of student athletes will be able to grow and monetize their NIL value at some level. I think so much of the national media attention and the scary discussions are around the $1,000 plus, $10,000, $20,000 plus deals and the car dealership and appearances and distractions from time on campus. And that is not what this is going to be about. If you look on a college campus today, go to a dorm hall, look in one room, you see somebody posting and getting paid to post on Instagram. The other person's streaming on Twitch and getting paid. Another one's putting a YouTube video up and making money through YouTube ads. Those are the same ways in which student athletes in a year are going to be monetizing their NIL. And they are low lift, high reward, and gives an opportunity for every student athlete to actually focus on their NIL value. So it doesn't matter whether you're the starting quarterback or the backup tight end. If you are able to understand what is NIL value, your school provides you the tools to grow that value, and then you're able to use a marketplace to monetize it. It doesn't matter your success on the field, and that's what's so great about NIL is that every student athlete has the opportunity. And there's one little part about this too I must emphasize is that $20 for one social media post or to show up and give an appearance, like somebody's like, why would you get out of bed for that? But everyone on this call probably went to college, and if you had 20 bucks in your pocket, holy cow, I mean, you're the king of campus. So it is, the big dollar deals get the headlines, but the fact is that the last person on the bench, the walk-on, making 20 bucks, 30 bucks here or there for use of their NIL is going to transform the experience for student athletes, which ultimately should be the goal of any changes around NIL.
So your point is 100% penetration under your assumptions.
The only reason you wouldn't make money in the NIL era is if you didn't want to.
Okay. Courtney.
I wholeheartedly agree and have been on my soapbox about focusing on the mass population of athletes at every level, because I think it's a tremendous opportunity. And there are so many student athletes who have multiple talents, and they can leverage those talents on the field, on the court, off the field, whatever they're doing, posting, apparel, making music, whatever it is. And I think that there's no question those deals are going to happen. The $20 deals are going to be important to these student athletes. And as you all know, my biggest fear is we're not going to teach them what to do with that money. And right now, we go into schools where it's a full scholarship team. They all get cost of attendance money. They all get anybody who's eligible for Pell Grants. I mean, they could be making like 22 grand a year, and they're not paying their rent. So we really, really, really need, we know what we're dealing with now. We need to push for education and really incentivize these student athletes to take these opportunities and to make the $20 to $2,000 deals.
AJ.
I very much agree with Blake. So to avoid being repetitive, we've all been there. Most of us were student athletes, and if not, you certainly care about the mission of student athletes. It's why you do what you do for a living. So it matters. I do believe anyone who wants can. There's a really interesting marketplace to look at. So the open doors for the other world is the full screens or maker studios. If you get a chance, you can just Google it, read the Wikipedia page in 15 minutes, and you'll be somewhat knowledgeable about how this marketplace works, where endorsees or influencers are put together with advertisers. And that's basically what Blake's business does. And there's a proven model there that any current student in all of collegiate athletics could do to monetize their social media following. So this isn't rocket science at that low level. The complexity, of course, gets into, is this really about playing performance and recruiting, and the larger deals that are really commercially motivated, like equipment and apparel deals. But yeah, just basically social media, there is a liquid, efficient, and observable marketplace that is there for the taking. I'm glad Blake started this business because, wow, are you ready for this, right? But no question, and that money matters. We have been there before, right? It's only fair.
We just got an interesting question about recruiting. And how do you see athletic departments and coaches and recruiting, football and basketball and other sports, handling NIL? And how can they successfully use it to their advantage? How can it be used to advantage without creating bad actors and bad situations?
Tom, I'll take you back to a moment where it's 2005. It's the first time I visit Nebraska, right? I'm getting recruited across the country. I visit Nebraska, and they show you the stadium, and you look at it, there's 95,000 seats, and you see it's sold out since 1962. And there's certain kids in our group that are sitting there, wow, like slack-jawed. This is the coolest thing on the planet. Then they see the weight room, and it's going to be the biggest in the country. You see the Jumbotron. Everyone cares about something else. We got to the academic facilities, and they lead the country in academic All-Americans. I cared about that, right? And so for me, that's where I started to get like really excited about going to school there. So the task, the duty, and where NIL plays into this is it's just another department. It's another stop on the tour of campus of what you're able to offer. And schools that want to attract kids that care about it have to lean into it, right? And that's something that matters today, whether NIL compensation is there at all. Schools have started to invest in brand building efforts and helping their athletes leave school with a marketable presence. And for certain student athletes, that matters a great deal in recruiting. Other ones, they don't. So it's the fact is, in recruiting, you have to have an answer to what are you doing to help me build my NIL value, receive compensation, and it will matter a great deal to some and to others not at all. But if you ignore it, then any athletic director is going to have one less checkbox on their list when they're trying to get that coveted recruit.
Courtney, do you see it the same way?
I see it the same way. I also think about some of the programs that really leverage their facilities heavily, and the families that really care about all of that. And that weighs a larger part of their decision than maybe it did for you, Blake, at the time. You know, it sounds like you had a much higher focus on, other parts of the school than some families do now. So I think that, the concern around recruiting, that there's potentially, backdoor deals going on. I think that coaches and the athletic department, the, high school recruiters should be focused on differentiating, because it's unless they have built a brand new facility, which is exciting, but it looks like all the other brand new facilities, it's really hard to differentiate right now. I think there's so many quality institutions. And I think it's exactly what Blake said. How do you support NIL? But then, of course, as you know, I'm going to say, how are you going to make sure that kid is protected and makes that money and keeps it and makes it work for them? Because all of the deals and the money making in the world, the most amazing NIL incubator at any school is not going to be successful if we're not coaching the kids on how to manage all of that.
AJ.
Well, regarding your question, Tom, about recruiting and how it impacts recruiting, I just don't see a way that it doesn't happen. It happens today. It happens right now. It's not hard to identify today. It'll definitely not be hard to identify in this world. You don't need Navigate to do this fancy valuation and identify outliers, because there's software and marketplace programs like Open Doors. you can spot outliers quickly. It's really about enforcement. And, I know I have NCAA friends on this call. I hope it's not offensive, but trying to be honest, and step back from our industry because we want what's best for these student athletes. The NCAA isn't amazing at that enforcement, and they, legally don't have a lot of rights that allow them to dig deep. These are private transactions. I mean, this is America. It's a free market capitalist country. People have a right to their name, image, and likeness. They're now getting this as student athletes. They have a right to monetize that. These are private transactions. How you're going to stop that and monitor that and enforce that, that's extremely concerning. In my mind, it becomes a recruiting tool, and the NCAA is not very good at stopping it.
Yeah. So
But
we had a lot.
I hope I'm wrong.
No, we had a lot of discussion about institutional involvement. We've got a question on it about how deeply should the institution be involved? The NCAA and some of the proposals basically create that Chinese wall. And we talked about, how should group licensing be handled? Should there be joint deals between the school and the athlete? We even have a question here. How does the institution protect its marks from being commercialized by NIL sponsor with student athletes? So let's talk about institutional involvement. Let's start with you, Blake. What's your thought?
I've got an analogy that I like to use in talking about the institution involvement. Right. So let's say, take me back. I'll keep using my example at Nebraska. Right. Let's say that I was struggling in class, which didn't happen, Tom. So I was doing okay. But let's say I was. I'd go to an academic advisor, and they'd say, well, yeah, we got to get your grades up in that econ class. So get you an econ tutor. That tutor can sit down, help me with homework. They can, help me study for a test. They can walk me across campus, open the door for me, but they can't go in and take the test for me. Right. Take that and say, I'm hearing some audio feedback. You guys hear that? No? All right. So you take that analogy and imagine a year from now, a student athlete goes to school and says, hey, I want to make money for my NIL. They can sit down and put a plan together for them. They can get photos, videos, help them start a social media channel, understand the business economics of hosting a camp, right? But the moment they can't go to camp and take the money at the door, they can't. When the brands come calling, they can't answer the phone and do the deal for them. They can do everything up to the point, but then the kids have to take the test on their own, right? But from that, there's no restrictions. The student athlete should be and will be able to transact with anyone in the market. If you're a First National Bank school and Union Bank comes calling, then they can do a deal with Union Bank. The school cannot stop anything from happening in the marketplace. All they can do is prepare them for the moment in which they're going to take the test. And if they do right by, as Courtney says, and AJ, they know the value, then they're going to win. They're going to pass the test.
But how does the institution protect its marks?
That comes down to education as well, Courtney. You talk about this. If the student athlete understands, and we do this with the NFL Players Association right now, MLBPA, like when these guys do a deal with a non-sponsor of the NFL and the team in the league, they cannot have school, like the team or league marks on. You just can't, or even the school. So like there's already people out there supporting and educating athletes that if you're working with anyone other than these groups, you cannot have your logo shown. Someone has to educate those athletes. And if they get paid in an activation where there's marks shown or used, then it's deemed impermissible. Like it was one of those things, you did not have the rights. And this is true for anyone in the world. If I post a YouTube video and I'm wearing Nebraska gear and I make money on it and I didn't pay Nebraska for the marks, I get a cease and desist. I can't do it. Right. So licensing restrictions already exist in the market. There's no need to make it different. No one in the world can use a school's marks and make money. No one can, unless they pay for it. Pretty easy to govern something that's already been governed for a century in terms of IP rights. I'm obviously passionate about it, Tom, but that's how I feel. I don't know.
Oh, good. Courtney.
So institutional involvement, I'm going to pick up on Blake's analogy. Same thing with the athletes. They go to practice every day. They have coaches. They're, working on plays. They're working on fundamentals, but they cannot step on the court, the track, the field, and do it for them. So right. I think we don't need to recreate the wheel here. The institutional involvement should be on the same level as it has been. It's just a new topic, and it's a fairly dangerous topic, and so they have to be really careful. Athletic department staff are there to help the student athletes. I always say you don't get into that business for the money. You can ultimately make a lot of money if you become certain coach at a certain school, but they're there because they care about the kids, and they're not trained in any of these areas to be specialists in any of these areas, and we shouldn't expect them to be. I think, as far as the rights go, Blake knows much more about it than I do, and certainly Luke from the call before knows much more about it than I do, and he deals with it every single day. It sounds like the regulations are going to be pretty clear, and then again, there needs to be monitoring, education, and ongoing monitoring to make sure that everybody is really aware. Like, they should be like the NFL player that Blake talked about. They should know what kind of deal, if they're signing, they need to be focusing on or getting advice, and that can't come from the athletic department. It's a conflict, and they're not trained to do it.
AJ, your thoughts?
We might have
Might have
lost.
Hey,
Yeah.
I mean, on this topic, just real quick, the thing is, when a sponsor signs on with the school or a licensee, there's an agreement between the school and that licensee, and they can tell them how their marks can be used. And so if the NCAA wants to restrict use of marks with student athletes, they would just need to change one line in their agreement with all of their licensees that says you cannot use these marks in tandem with student athlete NIL. Now it's done, because the NCAA, their enforcement is going to be upon the schools. And so the rule change can be made easily to the schools so that they're not able to allow the sub-license of their marks to a student athlete by way of this back door. And it exists in the pro market today. We'd be happy to talk about how it works, right?
How about joint deals between where, Albertson says, listen, we want not only the SMU, but we want SMU's star quarterback. That's one question. And then how do you feel about the whole group licensing issue?
Yeah, well, if they want this, I mean, if they want the star quarterback, they got to go to the quarterback. They're not going to go to get the quarterback through the school, right? Again, that's kind of like the school can have no party to the transaction, that sort of thing, okay? But if you want to visualize it, you're driving down the road and you see an Albertson and SMU billboard, that's good, okay? Then you see an Albertson and star quarterback billboard, that's good. The third billboard is Albertson, SMU, and the star quarterback, not good, according to the current proposal in terms of no alignment of school marks with the student athlete, because what you're doing there, Tom, is you're blending NIL rights and the value of that student athlete's NIL value and the value of the school. And what we're trying to do is say that student athletes should be compensated for the value of their NIL, like their value, their rights, not the combined rights.
You were opposed to institutional, kind of those institutional joint deals.
I understand why it exists, Tom, because as everyone mentioned, by cutting off group licensing rights, you're just cutting the market in half and saying, guys, let's just handle half of it. Let's figure out the one-to-one promotion between businesses and individuals and the payments that are going to occur, and then we'll figure out the rest later. So I don't think group licensing is gone. I just do not think it should exist in 2021.
But go back to the joint deal. So if a school and an athlete want to do a joint deal with Albertson and they're separately represented, are you opposed to that deal, that billboard that says Albertson and the star quarterback?
No, not at all. I mean, 100% do it. And you can't, so just where I stand, is that the school, no one can restrict whoever pays an athlete. Like anyone on the planet can be your existing sponsors, it could be your existing licensees, endemic sponsors, your apparel partner, they can pay them or their competitor can pay them. You cannot stop who they sign with. The only way to supersede or control who student athletes sign with is to be the first one to sign the student athlete and have an exclusive term in it in your product category. Yeah. Right? So there's no restrictions on who student athletes can sign with.
AJ, I know we lost you for a minute.
My apologies. My computer overheated and I was overheating as well. Courtney said it well, which is there's established marketplace for this. This is the only sport and league in the world that's like this. So these things have been sorted out many times over many countries all over the world. But I would say that it does have a cannibalizing effect on your multimedia rights partners. And as far as it being inside a university, virtually every major university outsources their multimedia rights voluntarily. So the idea that a university would then manage this marketplace or do these deals, that's silly because they add up to a much smaller number. They're much more complex. There's a lot of small transactions. That's overwhelming administratively. But I do think it's a concern to ask yourself, how do these deals work together? And it's appropriate that there's a role here for the Learfields and the JMIs of the world, where they're collaborating and hopefully pitching those athletes as spokespeople and somehow sharing in the spoils.
Courtney.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, you know, to finally be getting to the point where we're actually allowing student athletes to exercise their constitutional right doesn't mean we should be throwing them in the mix with group deals. I agree with Blake that it's going to evolve, but out of the gate, separate deals, I don't see how any other scenario makes sense. I think of AJ, I quote your study all the time when you did the valuation of the top 25 student athletes and the UCLA women's gymnastics team being worth $1.25 million. There's a lot of valuation that goes on in these deals, and that has to be considered too. Is the UCLA gymnastics team worth $1.25 million because of UCLA? Well, that's where they perform. But all those individual athletes have gone viral. And so that value is theirs, and they're entitled to it.
So we got a question for Blake, but welcome your responses as well. So whose responsibility does it become to pursue mark infringement? Is the institution's general counsel office going to start sending cease and desist letters to athletes, or its compliance office just going to tell its athletes to take tweets down? Does Open Doors currently have solutions to monitor infringing marks? And then we'll turn to the other two of you to get your perspective on it.
Hey, look, I love this. I mean, guys, everyone on this call, somebody at your school manages the use of your marks, and it's up to them to send a cease and desist to anybody. You go down to the farmer's market, somebody's making a purse out of the Nebraska marks they got at Hobby Lobby. You can tell them they can't do it because it's your marks. They didn't pay for the license of it. I mean, it is one of those things that now that happens in the pro space today, is that there are times in which professional athletes, and this happens in college, we got student athletes that are posting highlights of the game they just played, that if the school they played for posted the same highlight, they get a cease and desist from the conference in which they're a part of because they used media rights without the permissions to do so. The student athlete will be retweeted. Like they will be, you don't cease and desist athletes. You don't see it very often, but the challenge here is that if certain schools figure out that, hey, if we don't cease and desist our athletes when they're using our marks, then they can get more deals, then there becomes a distinct advantage. I think that's the first loophole that everyone's going to try and find is like, well, why don't I sub-license my rights to my student athletes at a very low cost so they can use our marks? And if that happens, then you're creating this backdoor. So that's where in which the NCAA has the ability to say, in the group license, in the licensing rights of the school themselves, let's put in this line that says you cannot allow the use of your school marks alongside a student athlete's school marks. And if we want to change those rules, we take it out, right? So in terms of marks rights enforcement, everybody under the sun is already in that space and place. And then on that side, Tom, like our job or ability just to identify when marks are used out of turn on the posts of athletes, and we track the social media accounts of tens of thousands of athletes across the planet to see what they say when they say it. And if somebody's rights are violated, then they can be informed. Again, that's something we help protect at the pro level.
Courtney, what are your thoughts?
It's a scalability issue. Everything's in place and it just needs to be scaled according to the regulations. I don't see it being more complicated than that.
AJ?
Oh, AJ, you can say it again.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Great. I hope you don't mind me going off script back to the group licensing part of the conversation, but it breaks my heart. I have to say, EA Sports is able to make a profitable video game that is really important in attracting the next generation of fans. It's a gateway to being a fan. Those student athletes love seeing themselves in that video game. They play those games. Everybody wins, but we're scared of and staying away from the group licensing concept because of some of the things that may come tied to, like collective bargaining. And much like my earlier comments, if we take a step back from all of this, if we're an alien that lands at planet Earth today and says, here's how other sports and leagues and professions work, and here's how this thing in amateurism in collegiate athletics is working, and please remember how much I love collegiate athletics. It's the only thing I care about as a fan. It's an absolute passion. But to not have these athletes able to collectively bargain and do group licenses in the exact same model that again is done all over the world and in every sport in our country, including amateur athletics like the Olympics. It breaks my heart that we can't find a way to allow them to collectively bargain or some hybrid of that. Tom, I'd love to hear you comment on this, because this is the role for LEAD1, right? Is to lobby and represent the voice of athletic directors and athletics in general.
I would say generally in our survey, the ADs were more supportive of group licensing than where the NCAA's current position is. But again, that wasn't a no from the NCAA. It was more of a tabling at the present. So I do think that it's still part of the overall solution in the long run. This is a quick answer question. Who do you think is we got a question about who do you think is the best regulator of all this? I mean, is it the free market? Is it the NCAA, the conferences, the school, a third party? Who's going to be sort of the policeman here, the police person on this whole thing, Courtney?
Third party. I think everybody else has way too many places for conflict.
Blake?
I would say there's a third party as well as that is ingesting information from everyone else. Like ultimately everything has to feed into one place in which to create normative data to determine market value and who's right, who's wrong. And there are other industries which have done this successfully that are private industries, and I will talk about that when you talk about it. But a third party administrator with the support of a federal bill.
AJ?
I do believe third party. There's no question. It's a role that we at Navigate could play, but I honestly think it's easier than that. With data and technology and scaled systems and such, it's much easier to identify those outliers. But yeah, the real regulation, is it necessary if there's a wide open free market? Again, I love collegiate athletics. I love the amateur model, but this is a noticeable step toward commercialization and freedom of those rights and what follows with recruiting and group licensing. And if there's just a free open market someday, just like pro sports, then what do we have to monitor? And so be it if the car dealership in Tuscaloosa, Alabama wants to irrationally sponsor every athlete in football so that they attend. Who's losing and who's winning here? It's not a level playing field right now in collegiate athletics. And the student athletes will be pretty big winners in this. So I'm not advocating for this. I'm just sharing that black markets emerge and there's regulations or restrictions on a free and open market. And that black market exists today for recruiting. So why not above board? Why not regulate it?
Courtney, I got a question that came for you about time management. I mean, these athletes are already overburdened. The questionnaire said, aren't you adding unbelievable obligations to them? Won't their school suffer? Won't their purpose for being there suffer?
One of the things they need tremendous training on is time management. Because yes, the answer is yes, if nobody is helping them manage time and making decisions, making the decision to even participate in an opportunity to get compensation for your name, image, and likeness. They have to study themselves. They have to set goals, understand why they would participate. Are they participating because they're going to make the $20 deal, because they're a partial scholarship athlete and they want to try to bridge that out-of-pocket cost so they can graduate debt-free? They need to figure that out, and they're not going to just walk onto campus and decide that they need to set goals and decide why they want to do it and then how to pursue it. And they have to have a plan, because if not, they're kids. If somebody's gonna pay them 10 grand to go sign autographs at a car dealership at the same time as practice, we can all figure out which way that's gonna go until it stops. But we can proactively and preemptively help avoid those conflicts and help avoid the pressure. I mean, they're under tremendous pressure anyway. We've had to really strengthen mental health efforts, not just over the last few years, but now especially with the pandemic. And the last thing they need is more pressure. So education, help, and training with time management for sure.
So we have a number of questions about antitrust. And You know, one point was made, is this a dangerous path for the NCAA given their past abuses? That was a question. But when you look at it, the NCAA is going to Congress for preemption. So there won't be 50 state laws. So there'll be one federal law. I think most people obviously agree that makes a lot of sense. Although there's some members of Congress who think it could be regulated state by state. Then they want an antitrust exemption. And the point there is, look, if they put up any guardrails at all, there's going to be litigation. And so they're saying, well, listen, if we can come up with a workable bipartisan solution, protect us from all these lawsuits, because we don't have a totally free, unfettered market. Your take on that, Blake?
No, I would say that there, and to talk about a model that has worked at a federal bill level, I'll point to the Sunshine Laws, the Sunshine Act in the pharmaceutical industry, which is the federal taking a stance that says transparency is what this market needs. If a pharmaceutical company is paying a doctor to go on a ski trip with their family and that's the reason they're assigning a medicine to this patient, not because it's what the patient needs, like that's not good for society, right? And so there is a model in which that there's private companies that have to report on the transactions, the amount of money they're spending on entertaining doctors and bringing them to different markets. And what I'm saying is that if you bring that to this space, it's the need is for transparency over pure governance, right? And then allow the market to determine, once you see what's happening, then everyone's going to police everybody, right? I think that there's no one better to police Iowa football recruiting than Nebraska football fans. Like, in terms of having visibility into who's getting paid by who to do what, where, when, and how, and trying to just, again, one person's role, this third-party administrator, should be the very first thing is to bring transparency, right? And I know, AJ, you guys are, when you have the actual primary data on how much a property is getting paid by this person and one that's getting paid by this person, it makes you better, right? Because you can inform on really what should be in certain markets in certain places. So when I talk about antitrust, it more starts with, we need a foundation and an agreement from the federal level that transparency will protect this market because it deserves protecting. Now, the restrictions in the pharmaceutical industry, in theory, they didn't have to do that, but everybody came together and said, yes, it would be better if everything was made known in this industry, and it would help protect the patients, which ultimately there's analogies aside, but it applies to the uniqueness of college sports.
No, it's a very interesting example. AJ,
Well,
you know,
on your
go ahead. Sorry.
On your comment related to antitrust, it worries me a little bit that that's a part of their proposed solution. To be exempt would be to say that no one can compete with the NCAA. So imagine the Power Five decides to start a basketball tournament and they create their own division and they play the role of the NCAA. And this is what happens in other sports, right? You don't have conferences with administration and then also a league administration. And you can see reasons why schools with 10 times the budget of other schools all playing in the same division is not a level playing field and pretty tough to live by the same rules. That worries me. It feels a little bit like the NCAA is protecting their position and their role in this world. And I think it's healthy to question it. I don't think it's a negative thing for them to have the threat that universities could administer themselves, which essentially is the NCAA, but the antitrust thing worries me.
Courtney, do you have any thoughts on it?
I just have a quick question. Isn't there extra incentive to be immune from that because of the lawsuit that was filed that could ultimately, if they are subject to antitrust, it could ultimately be a class and it could go back 4 years for compensation from some of the collegiate athletes. My point is, I thought that's what I read, and I think it's an incredibly complex issue when it comes to the financial implications. I mean, if that happens, that's hundreds of millions of dollars.
Well, maybe what we do need to do is educate our members on that. So that's a good suggestion. As we are winding down, so we asked this question to the previous panel, if you could add one thing to this federal bill, and I know Blake, you talked about sunshine being the great disinfectant and disclosure is the key. Is that what you would put as your priority for a federal bill?
It's the first step. Like there is one thing, it's to shed light. We don't know, we can't regulate a market that has not ever existed, and you can't do it before you turn it on, right? And that is one of those things that is a silly thing to even fathom. You can attempt to predict. I think AJ and I could get together some spreadsheets and documents and put the best prediction of what could happen together. And the day the market turns on, we may be right, we may be wrong, right? But the truth is, once the market turns on, if information isn't being gathered and being shed a light on it and transparency, then we have no chance. So I think that if we start with transparency, a la Sunshine Law, Sunshine Act, then we have a chance.
AJ, your one thought for the bill.
I think we're going this way anyway. So I wish there was a collective voice for student athletes as a part of it, whether you call it a union, and I know there's negatives to unions, but why do they not have that right and voice to represent themselves in this? Where's their seat at the table? I know they're on committees and what have you, but I would like to see some form of collective bargaining rights.
Courtney.
I'm going to echo Luke's thought and give my own: education, 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 and vetting of all of the third-party professionals that could even think about coming into contact with these student athletes.
Do you think a federal bill should mandate education? Is that even possible?
Well, I am not a lawyer, so I don't know.
Yeah.
I do think, I mean, the educational institutions are there for education. It seems a bit redundant, but I can tell you from working with these student athletes, they're not educated to where they need to be. And
Yep.
I do think it should mandate that anybody coming in contact with them is vetted, and not just vetted, but then monitored ongoing.
As we close, and we want to thank you all, and particular thanks to Blake, I want to ask you the 5-year question. You know, NIL's coming, as we know, either state, federal, or the NCAA, or all three. It's going to be a brave new world. How do you see that world playing out? What will it mean to college sports? What will the landscape look like? Let's hear your vision, Blake.
I say 5 years from now, I'll give you a twist on this. The professional athlete endorsement market will look more like the student athlete endorsement market will look like over the next 5 years. And what I mean by that is that we have a chance. If you've worked in athlete endorsements at any stage of your career at all, it's a messy world. It's tough. There's a lot of people involved, a lot of good people and a lot of bad people. Like there's a chance that this becomes the standard way in which athletes are able to build and monetize their NIL that will translate more to the pros than trying to take the existing pro model and slap it on top of college. So I think 5 years from now, you're going to see a cleaner, more organized, and rather than having a select few of pro athletes that really get it, the 500 to 5,000 a year that get some level of education on endorsements, you're going to have 500,000 student athletes that are educated, equipped, and prepared to succeed in this very important part of their life, which is maximizing this time of their life in which they have eyeballs on them. So it is we're going to build something that's going to impact not just the next 5 years, but 50 in terms of a cleaner, more structured environment in which athletes can succeed, and it will have a bigger impact on the pros than the opposite effect.
AJ.
I do believe there will be an efficient marketplace where this is all suddenly appears reasonable to us, and we're suddenly comfortable with it when it seemed crazy just a few years ago. I think the group licensing thing will happen, and I think that we're moving in the right direction, as difficult as this is, as much as the fan part of me hates to see the amateurism sort of label or road. I think we're moving towards being on the right side of history. So we will find ourselves comfortable with this, and there will be abuses, that there are today, and I think there will be less in 5 years than there is today.
Courtney?
I think we're going to have some growing pains. I hope we learn from those growing pains. I hope we anticipate them and are proactive and not reactive. But I think ultimately through learning through those, in 5 years, we are going to see student athletes graduating much more prepared, whether they go into professional athletics or the 98% of them who will go into a profession, something other than what sport they play. And I think a huge part of that is going to be these growing pains, but it's going to be the preparedness. It's real life now, and it's not hypothetical anymore. And hopefully the institutions and everybody involved will provide the education and the guidance so that that's where we are.
Well, thank you all for your perspective. These industry perspectives have been invaluable. I learned a lot today. You know, my only regret is that I'm not much younger and just entering college tomorrow, because I would love to play in this brave new world with all the opportunities. It's very exciting, and you know, it just has to be done with balance. And your real life perspective was very, very helpful. And again, thank you for doing it. And Blake, thank you for your sponsorship. And to all of our viewers, if you have any questions that you want to send in, please follow up, and we will send out a synopsis of this tomorrow, as well as the recorded video. So have a great day, and best wishes to you all. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Tom.